Hi, my name is Ben, and this is Board Game Dad. Whether you've just started to explore the board gaming hobby, or if you've been in it for years, I think you can appreciate what I'm trying to accomplish in this video. See, if you go to Board Game Geek and you look at the top 100 board games, it's a pretty overwhelming list. So if you weren't familiar with games, where do you even start? What's the best game to try first? See, the challenge that I've taken on in this video is to condense the top 100 to just 10. 10 games that epitomize what the BGG top 100 are all about. Now, that's not just 10 of my favorite games out of the top 100, but 10 games that capture the essence of the most popular games in the board gaming hobby. Now, if you're an experienced gamer, this is a challenge that I would extend to you as well, and I would encourage you to put your list in the comments below. But if you're new to games, then I would invite you to try out my list or even check in the comments to see what other people are saying. I'll use the hashtag top 10 of BGG 100 in this video so that you can find other videos that may have been inspired by this one. Now, I would imagine that everybody who tries to take on this challenge is going to have a different approach. So let me describe my approach. So first of all, because the whole idea is to share these board games with people who may be new to the scene, I wanted to make sure the games were accessible, and when possible, I would favor a more affordable game over a more expensive one. So cost is taken care of, and the other thing is complexity. Some games on the top 100 are very, very complex, and while I don't want to neglect complex games, I do think that if there is a game that captures the complexity without being overwhelming, I'm going to favor that as well, so that the games are a little bit easier to play. And then finally, I want to get a fair representation. So what I tried to do was go through the list. I went through the list a couple of times actually, and I tried to categorize the games in different ways, and then put the games into these categories and count them up and see how the games were broken down. And that way, I can try my best to make sure that every genre of game, so to speak, is represented. Now granted, there are more than 10 genres and I can only put 10 games in this list, so there's a little bit of crossover, a little bit of blending. I've chosen more than one game that represents several different categories, but that's how I've approached it. Last thing before I jump into the list, if you're interested in checking out the games and their prices while you're watching this video, you should just click the link in the description to go to the perfectboardgame.com, and you'll be able to see all of the games that I mentioned in this video. I mean, 10 make the list, but I'm going to be talking about quite a few others. So check that out, link in the description at theperfectboardgame.com. Let's go into the list. The first game on this list is unique from all of the others. Here's why. Because the first category is a category that is undeniably popular, but does not appeal to me. I typically don't play a lot of these kinds of games. These are the adventure games. These are games that are produced by Americans and infused with the blood of Dungeons and Dragons. They're not really my style of game. Now, I've played Mage Knight and Legends of Andor and Robinson Crusoe and Nemesis, a lot of these games that are kind of in that category. They're driven a lot by luck or cards, and they can be very unpredictable, and almost always they're cooperative. Players are working together to go on some sort of adventure. So I did some research, because this is outside of my area of interest. I did some research, and I took a look at a very, very popular game, a game that I've heard a lot of people talking about it, and here's what makes this game unique. It is probably the only game I will recommend that I myself have not played. I did not play this game because this is not my field of expertise, but from everything I've looked into, this is probably the best you can do for this category. Okay? The game is Gloomhaven: Jaws of the Lion, and it is a cooperative adventure game with a legacy style. Legacy meaning that you are changing things on the board as you play through. You're changing your character, you're changing the map, you're going on different missions, and what it does is it captures adventure. The game is basically a cheaper and more accessible version of Gloomhaven, which is currently the #1 game on Board Game Geek. But the way that the rules are written, the way that the game plays, it has a lot to intrigue somebody even like me. I mean, I haven't played it. I don't know if it's really my style, but I do think it's an excellent way to get into the adventure style type games. Now, that being said, this game also embodies a whole other genre that I didn't get into my top 10. The genre of horror games. There are several horror games on the list. If that's something you want to touch, I would recommend Nemesis. Same style of game, just a little bit more terrifying. And then finally, one of the reasons I chose this game is because it's a legacy style game, and there are several other legacy games, like Pandemic, for example. Pandemic Legacy in its different seasons is on the list more than once. And so that's why I've put Jaws of the Lion on here. The next game represents all of the simpler games on the list, and there aren't very many. In fact, if you're looking at the entire list of 100 games, most of those games have pretty complex rules. There is about a handful, 10 games or so, that have pretty simple gameplay. So for this game, I wanted to recommend something that was short and sweet and easy to learn, and it also checks the cooperative gameplay box. And that game is The Crew. The Crew is a trick-taking game where players are working together to make sure that assigned players take the tricks that they're supposed to take. If you're not familiar with trick-taking, it's a lot like Bridge or Spades or Pinochle Hearts, a lot of regular card games or trick-taking games, and it is a ton of fun. Every single time I introduce this to people, it's very addictive gameplay. People always want to play multiple rounds of this game. Excellent game to play. And not to mention, The Crew is on the list twice. There is a ocean version of The Crew, as well as the space version. This is the original, and this is the one that I recommend. The next game embodies the abstract games on the list. These are games like Tzolk'in, or Azul, or even Tigris and Euphrates. And the game that I'm selecting is great because not only is it quite abstract, but it also has a great bidding mechanic, which is very common in a lot of the very popular games on the list. It's the game Five Tribes. And what I like about Five Tribes is it's got an excellent kind of Mancala type gameplay where you're picking up workers. I mean, it's kind of like a worker placement game. It has a lot of characteristics, in fact, of the games that are on the top 100. But you're picking up your workers and you're dropping them off one at a time. So you've got 4 and you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, and where the last worker lands, that's the action that you get to perform. And the color of the worker and the space that it lands on dictate what you can do. But as you're playing the game, better moves stand out from other ones. And so that's where the bidding comes in. You're always bidding to see who goes first. It's a great, pretty abstract game. A little bit more complex than like The Crew that I mentioned earlier, but I do think it's an excellent one to embody so many characteristics in the top 100. The next game that I chose is my dice game. A few dice game on there that are really popular: Castles of Burgundy, Voyages of Marco Polo. The one that I chose is called Trois. Trois is a game where every player places workers in order to get dice for the round. They roll their dice, but then, whether they have good luck or bad luck, every player has the opportunity to buy their opponent's dice. And so a player with bad luck can buy better dice from an opponent and kind of buy their luck from them, so to speak. There's also a almost semi-cooperative nature about this game, and I needed more games that had a cooperative nature about them, where in this game, not only are players trying to achieve their own objectives, but the city where they're performing their actions is always under attack, and they have to work together to fend off marauders. So I think it, once again, does a lot for so many of the games that are on the top 100. The next game I chose to embody two-player tension. These are games like Netrunner or Seven Wonders Duel, and I should say I nearly picked Seven Wonders Duel for this category, but I didn't because this game also has a great map. And I feel like playing on a map is something that's so common in very popular board games. So the game is Twilight Struggle. Now, Twilight Struggle is a heavier game on this list. I said I was going to favor easier games. That's why I nearly picked Seven Wonders Duel. But I do need to get some complex ones. What this one does is it recreates the Cold War. And it does this basically through a card mechanic and an area control mechanic on the map. Players are using their cards in order to gain control of certain regions, and then from time to time during the game, those regions get scored, and there's a little bit of a tug-of-war between who has the most influence. The thing that makes the game very interesting is that throughout the entire game, there are simply things that you cannot do without conceding some benefit to your opponent. So the whole strategy of the game is, if I have to concede something to my opponent, how can I play it in such a way that it is as least beneficial for them or as little beneficial, as of little benefit to them as possible? And that is a very, very tense decision to make, which is why I think it's so good. It's also an oldie. This game has been around for a long time, and years ago it was #1 on the top 100 list. So I had to pick it, but do expect a much denser rule set in Twilight Struggle. The next game is the game that I selected to exemplify the largest category on the entire list. It is the middleweight Euro style game. And there are so many games that fall into this category. I think I counted over 20 of them. But there's all these worker placement games like Great Western Trail. There's the Uwe Rosenberg games like Fields of Arle and Feast for Odin. There's Kalis in Puerto Rico and so many more. The one that I chose is, I have a little bit of bias because it's also the game that was sort of my gateway, the game that really got me into gaming. And it's Agricola. Agricola is an excellent farming game. It's designed by Uwe Rosenberg, who has multiple games on the list. What you're doing is you're placing a worker every turn. When you take a space, it blocks the space from all of your opponents, and then that space gives you resources which you use to build your farm. The objective of the game is just to have a farm that can basically produce everything. You've got to score for all the different kinds of animals, all the different kinds of crops, and all of the different kinds of structures that you can build. Agricola is just a classic. It's elegant. It's not very difficult to learn. There are several editions of the game that are on the list. It's basically a simplified version of Caverna, or rather, since Caverna is a more recent game, Caverna is a more complicated version of Agricola. And I feel almost sentimental about it. Like, it's been on the list for over a decade. Excellent game, Agricola. In addition to the medium-weight Euro-style games, there's also at least 10 heavy Euro-style games. And these are games like Brass, Underwater Cities, Terraforming Mars, Eclipse, Food Chain Magnate, all the Lacerda games like On Mars or The Gallerist. But the one that I chose, I feel, has some really intuitive rules. So even though heavy Euro-style games tend to be more complicated, this one is really easy to understand. And it has a great economy and excellent components as well. It's the game Barrage. And in Barrage, what you're trying to do is score victory points by producing energy through hydroelectric dams, and you're constructing these dams on rivers where the water flow is a part of the game's mechanic. So basically, if you construct a dam upriver of one of your opponents, that's going to impact their energy production. And then there's a very tight economy for how you get those resources and build your dams. I loved teaching this game when I was playing with my friends because it's just a intuitive play, and it's still a really heavy game. It's probably going to be a more expensive one. All of the heavy games are, but like Lacerda games are going to go over $100. Barrage is like $60. So I think that it's a great and much more accessible game as well. The next game is the best embodiment of a card mechanic, and there are a lot of card games on there. I counted at least 12 that kind of match the style of this one, but there are even more. I didn't even count Dominion when I was looking up how many card games there are. But you've got Terraforming Mars, Through the Ages, Wingspan, Everdell, Clank, Lost Ruins of Arnak. But the one that I chose, it's Ark Nova. So in Ark Nova, you are using your cards to build a zoo and collect animals in your zoo, build pens, collect animals, put the animals in the pens, build attractions, and also achieve victory points by pursuing conservation projects. It plays very nicely. I've actually made videos about this game before, comparing it to Terraforming Mars. One of the reasons why I pick it is because I think that gameplay is a lot swifter, and I think it's a lot more accessible. It doesn't feel as heavy. So Ark Nova would be my recommendation for a card style game. The next game is also a Euro style game, but it is the category of exploration and settlement. So there are so many games that fall under this theme that I feel like I needed to pick something. I also picked something that I feel is a lot different from something like Agricola, which is more of your classic worker placement game. The game that I'm choosing, though, is a game that I don't own. It's also kind of a game I don't prefer as much, but that's only because I'm old school. Here's the thing. The game is Gaia Project, and Gaia Project is a new edition of Terra Mystica. See, I like Terra Mystica because I'm old school and I've been playing games for a really long time. Everyone says Gaia Project is better. Everyone says that Gaia Project is better and that it fixes some things about Terra Mystica. I've played Gaia Project, but I can't get over it. Every time I play Gaia Project, I'm just thinking, this is just space Terra Mystica. And then I don't get into it. And so I'm not, it's like it hinders my way to think critically. I shouldn't say that, but I feel like it's a hack. But that's because I like this game. If you don't know this game, then you should just play Gaia Project because everyone says the Gaia Project is better. And I'm taking their word for it, even though I like this one. Anyway, it's got the exploration settlement. Another one that I think is really great for this is Concordia, but Gaia Project is a little bit higher rated. And it has an app version too, so you can play it on your iPhone. The next game is the multiplayer warfare style game. So games like Blood Rage or Twilight Imperium, Root, Dominant Species. Some of these games have multiple editions. Twilight Imperium is on this list multiple times, but it's a giant game. I would not put it on my list. The game that I'm choosing is more of a Euro style game. I chose it for a couple of reasons. One, because the list is so dominated by Euros, and two, because it's produced by Stegmaier Games, which has several games on the list as well, including Viticulture, which I didn't list. But the game is Scythe. And Scythe is kind of an economic warfare style game. I really like the mechanic that's used in this game for fighting. You're basically using cards to reinforce your troops, and different troops have different values. So you're discarding these cards, and if you get beat, you just go back to your home base. It's not so terrible as your pieces get destroyed, which can be kind of frustrating, especially if you're experiencing these games for the first time. And another thing that I liked about Scythe is in Scythe, there are not so many words on cards, but instead the events are represented with pictures, and you are supposed to read into the picture using your imagination. The pictures tell a story. I really love that aesthetic, that it doesn't need to be described with flavor text, but rather with artwork. One thing that I did not list on my top 10 is any IP games, intellectual property games, because I don't get into intellectual property. I feel like I did it an injustice. Maybe I should have put some Star Wars game or something on my list, but I do feel like Scythe, because of its artwork and because of how it tells a story, it almost gets at that what an IP game does. And so I also favored it over so many others because of this characteristic. That is my warfare recommendation, Scythe. So, those are the 10 games that best exemplify the Board Game Geek Top 100. What do you think? I would love to hear what your top 10 are, or if you're going to post a YouTube video, you can also use the hashtag top 10 of BGG 100. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.